There are stories that pierce the soul. Stories that feel so raw, so brutally real, that they stay in your chest long after you hear them. This is not fiction. This is not a fairy tale. This is a wound turned into testimony. And once you hear it, you will never look at your own life the same way again. Imagine waking up one morning thinking it was just another ordinary day. You kiss your loved ones goodbye. You go to work. You check your phone. You complain about the traffic. Everything feels routine, predictable, safe. But then, in the blink of an eye, everything changes. In one single day, you lose it all. Not just your job, not just your savings, but your family, your peace, your very reason to breathe. That is what happened to Daniel, a man who once thought he had everything under control. He had a stable job, a small but warm home, and a family that lit up his world. He believed he was building a future of security and love. But destiny, ruthless and merciless, had a very different plan. On that dark day, Daniel's life collapsed in ways he never imagined possible. His wife and daughter were on their way back from a family gathering, laughing, talking, full of joy. Daniel stayed behind because he had important work to finish. He always had important work. He told himself that tomorrow he would make it up to them. Tomorrow he would take them out. Tomorrow he would give them all his attention, but that tomorrow never came. The phone rang, a sound that would forever scar his ears. A trembling voice on the other end said words that ripped him apart. There has been an accident. His wife and little girl never made it home. In just one instant, the people he loved most in the world were gone. Daniel dropped the phone. His knees hit the floor. His chest felt like it was being crushed from the inside. He screamed until his voice broke, but no sound could change what had already happened. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound in the universe. From that moment on, Daniel wasn't the same man. He was a shadow of himself, walking through the ruins of what used to be his life. The walls of his home, once filled with laughter, now echoed with emptiness. The toys of his little girl still sat on the floor. The scent of his wife's perfume lingered faintly in the air. Every object in the house became a knife stabbing his soul. He stopped working. He stopped eating. He stopped living. Friends tried to comfort him, but how do you comfort someone who has lost his entire world in a single day? At night, Daniel would sit on the edge of his bed staring at nothing, whispering their names over and over, as if the universe could bring them back. But the universe was silent, cruel. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Daniel drifted further into darkness. His face grew pale, his eyes hollow. He walked the streets aimlessly, sometimes sitting for hours in the park where he once played with his daughter. He could still hear her laughter echoing in his head, but when he turned, she was never there. The weight of absence was unbearable. He blamed himself. If only I had gone with them. If only I had worked less. If only I had said I love you one more time. Guilt became his prison. Regret became his chains. He hated himself for surviving when they had not. And yet, deep inside, a faint voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, life was not over. But how does a man rise again after losing everything? How does someone rebuild when the foundations of their existence have been turned to ashes? That was the question that haunted Daniel every single day. One night, unable to sleep, he walked aimlessly through the city. He ended up in front of a hospital. There, sitting on the cold pavement, he saw a little boy crying alone. His clothes were dirty, his face pale, his eyes swollen from tears. Daniel approached him and asked softly, "Are you okay?" The boy shook his head and said, "My mom is inside. She's very sick. I don't know if she's going to make it." Something in that boy's voice pierced Daniel's heart. It was the same fear his daughter might have felt if she had been left alone. For the first time in months, Daniel felt a spark tiny, fragile, but real. He sat with the boy for hours, holding his hand, telling him stories until the boy finally fell asleep against his shoulder. That night, Daniel realized something. Even in the deepest darkness, there are still people who need light. That small encounter ignited a slow transformation. Daniel started volunteering at the hospital. At first, it was painful. Every child's face reminded him of his daughter. Every tearful parent reminded him of his own loss. But as days went by, he noticed something. Even in their suffering, these families found ways to smile, to fight, to hold on to hope. And if they could, maybe he could too. It wasn't easy. Healing never is. Daniel cried many nights. He screamed at the sky, demanding answers that never came. But he also started to live again, piece by piece. He told stories to sick children. He brought flowers to lonely patients. He became a shoulder for grieving families, and in giving them comfort, he found fragments of his own. Daniel discovered a truth most of us ignore until it's too late. Life is fragile. Time is merciless. We are all one phone call away from losing everything. But in that fragility lies the greatest gift, a chance to love, to connect, to give meaning before it's gone. Slowly, Daniel rebuilt himself, not into the man he was before, because that man died the day his family did, but into someone new, someone who carried scars, but also carried light. He learned that sometimes the greatest strength is born from the deepest pain, and this is where Daniel's story becomes more than tragedite, becomes a message, a warning, a reminder for every single one of us who still has time. Because while Daniel lost everything in a single day, you still have today. You still have this moment. You still have the chance to call your parents, to hug your children, to kiss your partner, to forgive, to say I love you. Don't wait. Don't let tomorrow steal what only today can give. Daniel's story is a mirror, and when you look into it, you have to ask yourself, what are you doing with your time, with your life, with the people who truly matter? The months passed, and Daniel's routine at the hospital became the thread that held him together. He arrived early, stayed late, and often sat through the nights just to make sure no one felt abandoned. People started calling him the man with the quiet eyes. Eyes that carried storms, but also a strange kind of peace. He didn't speak much about his past. Most people assumed he was just another volunteer with a big heart. But inside, he carried a battlefield. Every smile he gave was stitched over his own pain. Every hand he held reminded him of the ones he had lost. And yet, the more he gave, the more he realized. Maybe his wife and daughter had not disappeared completely. Maybe their love was still alive, flowing through him, reaching others through his hands. One evening, a little girl with leukemia grabbed his hand and whispered, "Don't be sad, mister. Your family is watching you." Daniel froze. No one had ever said those words to him. The girl smiled, fragile yet luminous, and added, "They're proud of you." Tears streamed down his face uncontrollably. That night, he collapsed on his bed, sobbing, but for the first time. His tears weren't only of despair, they carried a strange, fragile sense of healing. It was then that Daniel understood something profound. Pain never truly leaves. You don't erase it. You don't move on. But you can learn to walk with it, and in walking, you might find paths you never imagined existed. Years later, Daniel had become a pillar in the community. People knew him as the man who transformed tragedy into compassion. He organized programs for grieving families, support groups for children, and even built a small foundation to help those who had lost everything. His own scars became bridges for others. But despite everything he had achieved, Daniel never stopped visiting the cemetery. Every Sunday, he sat by the graves of his wife and daughter, bringing fresh flowers, whispering stories of the lives he had touched. "I miss you," he would say softly. "But because of you, I can keep going. Because of you, others are not alone." It was during one of those visits that Daniel had a revelation. As he watched the sun set behind the trees, he realized that loss had taught him the greatest lesson of all. Life is not measured by what we accumulate, but by the love we give and the lives we touch. We don't get to choose how long we have, but we do get to choose how deeply we live. Daniel's story spread. First among the families he helped, then through word of mouth, and eventually through videos, talks, and testimonies. People across the world began to hear about the man who lost everything in a single day and yet managed to rise again. His name became a symbol of resilience, not because he was extraordinary, but because he was painfully human proof. But even in our weakest moments, we can still choose to stand. But let me tell you something important. Daniel's story is not just his. It's yours. It's mine. It's the story of anyone who has ever lost, who has ever broken, who has ever screamed into the night asking why me. His story carries a warning. Tomorrow is not promised. The hug you don't give today, the words you don't say, the forgiveness you don't offer may never have another chance. Think about it. How many times have you looked at your phone instead of looking at the eyes of someone who loves you? How many times have you postponed a conversation, a dinner, a moment, thinking there will always be more time? That's the lie. We all live with that. We have endless tomorrows. But Daniel's life proves otherwise. He thought he had time. He thought he had years, and in a single heartbeat, it was gone. Don't wait until the universe rips it all away. Don't wait until regret poisons your soul. Choose. Now, live now. Love now. Because in the end, when you stand at the edge of your own life, you will not remember the deadlines, the meetings, the emails. You will remember the laughter, the tears, the embraces, the voices of those you cherish. And if you miss those, nothing else will matter. Daniel rebuilt his life, not by erasing his pain, but by transforming it into love. That is the secret. That is the message he leaves us. Pain is inevitable. Loss is inevitable, but destruction is optional. You can drown in your sorrow, or you can rise from it like fire from ashes. And you're watching this right now. What will you choose? The clock is ticking. The people you love are waiting. Your story is being written, even as you listen to this. Don't let it be a story of regret. Let it be one of courage, of presence, of love so fierce, it leaves no space for doubt. When Daniel finally took his last breath, years later, he was not surrounded by silence. He was surrounded by families he had helped, children he had comforted, lives he had changed. His funeral was not a place of despair, but of gratitude. People cried, yes, but they also smiled, because Daniel's life had become proof that tragedy does not have to be the end. It can be the beginning of something greater. His tombstone did not carry a grand title, just a simple phrase. He lost everything, yet gave everything. And perhaps that is the most powerful legacy any of us can hope to leave. So now, I ask you, if this was your last day, how would you spend it? Who would you call? Who would you forgive? Who would you hold? Don't wait for tomorrow. Tomorrow is a lie. The only truth is now. Daniel's story ends here. But yours is still being written. Make it count.